now, probably in a room before this. This is the UCSF Helen Diller Family Comprehensive Cancer Center Office of Community Engagement, CAB2 ChatNChew. We call it CAB2 because, as you may know, we do have a community advisory board that meets for a business meeting. And this is not that business meeting, so it is the CAB2. The 2 also is a reminder for everybody to invite 2 people. The idea here is once you have registered with us, we're going to continue to invite you and let you know what the topics are that we'll be bringing to you. And at the end of today's talk, as we do every time, we'll be asking you, what do you want to hear about next? And then we'll be trying to meet your requests and be responsive to the interests that you have, in the hopes that you will invite 2 more people to this forum, so that we can continue to grow exponentially and so that we can make sure that everybody gets this information. That said, we do record this session, and during the Q&A, you will hear your own voices. You can raise your virtual hand, you can raise your real hand, we will call on you, you will unmute, and so you can ask questions directly. So just know that it is recorded, so your questions will be recorded. We post the recording on our website, so it will be available in perpetuity. You can send people to it, reference it, make sure again that folks are getting this very important information that we think is community relevant, because we typically take our suggestions for what we're doing from you. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. I'm really excited about this talk. I think you guys are going to enjoy it as well. Stephanie Chuang was diagnosed with stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2016. So what you're going to hear is coming directly from real firsthand experience. She created the patient story to help newly diagnosed patients and caregivers better understand and navigate life during and after treatment, and to connect with others. The patient story is a multi-channel platform that features in-depth video and written stories by people with cancer, survivors, and medical experts. And Stephanie's mission is to provide human answers to your cancer questions by sharing stories of people who have lived through it, by interviewing top specialists across different cancer types. And just so you're aware, Stephanie previously was, for a decade long, was an Emmy-nominated journalist working with NBC Bay Area as a special project and San Francisco-based reporter. So she brings those skill sets and quality to the curation of what's on the site and the production of it. And it's a beautiful site. If you haven't seen it, we will put the link in the chat. So you'll have lots of opportunity to explore. And I just want to welcome Stephanie and thank you so much for being here and for sharing the patient story, creating the patient story and sharing it with us.
Thank you, Dr. Rhodes. Thank you for that really warm intro. I want to thank you and Lori for helping me set this up so that I could be here. And I'm so glad to see all of these wonderful faces and names. It really is an honor. I know that everyone who's here is really invested in some mission to help people. And so I think that's where we're aligned. And I just wanted to start by saying, yes, I'll have a presentation. I really do want this to be an opportunity for you to be able to engage with me in asking questions on how storytelling can help you in your missions and in your objectives and priorities for this year. I know we have too many people to do, an actual intro. So I see some people have already, and Kim, Dr. Rhodes has already mentioned this, and Sonia's already shared, but if you could just in the chat, introduce yourself, what you do, and also if you have something in there specific to what you're hoping to learn, and I'll try my best to address that. So I'm going to start sharing my screen first, and can you all see that okay?
We can see it. We'll keep an eye on the chat for you so that you don't have to do both. So
Great.
It may pop in if there's something urgent that people have. Feel free to put questions in the chat as we go.
Thank you, Dr. Rhodes. Perfect. So yes, we are the patient story. A little quick about us. So started by patients for patients. And really what we're trying to do is humanize the experience and meet people where they are. And, I was really informed of that from my own firsthand experience, as Dr. Rhodes mentioned, And I just wanted to know, number one, that I was not alone. That was the first and foremost thing. I didn't want to feel so isolated. And the second part of that was being more empowered in the care. So there are two kind of distinct steps there in the way that we think about what we're doing. Our mission is to provide hope, inspiration, comfort, connection, and knowledge to cancer patients and their families through human answers to their cancer questions. Also, pardon me, I'm getting over a cough, and so I may have to take a break here and there just to take a sip of water. So my why, here's a picture of me as my mom and my then fiance were shaving my head. There's me at UCSF, actually, in a hospital bed. That was actually during the first week. That was the most difficult for me when we didn't know. We knew we had cancer, had no idea what exactly we had, and there's so many different paths depending on those answers. And so the not knowing was actually incredibly difficult. I was diagnosed young. I felt isolated. And what I wanted to look for was real voices. And as it says here, I wanted it to be beyond 3 paragraphs, because when I search for patient stories, that's often what I would find. And many times there were 2 kind of buckets here. There was the maybe the nonprofit fundraising patient story. So it is really great and really necessary, but it wasn't aligned with what I was looking for. The other might be for a hospital or healthcare system as a testimonial, also not what I was looking for. I also found a lot of medical jargon, WebMD type pages, which are important for some people, but I wanted to understand, again, in human terms, what is my life going to look like day to day? What is cancer in terms of an actual experience? And for me, that expert was going to be someone who'd been through the treatment that I was about to go into. Now, if any of you, and I'm sure, and unfortunately, many of us are hit by cancer, whether as a patient or a caregiver or just know somebody, but there's a very common shared experience. And I'll say in this line of work now that I'm very grateful to do, I've now spoken with hundreds of people across different cancers for like 60 minutes minimum, right? And a very common shared experience that we have is people find out that we have cancer, and as well-intentioned as they are, they will bring to us a lot of comments and energy that are actually quite deflating. So an example, I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma, diffuse large B cell, a very aggressive blood cancer, and young for the diagnosis. And a lot of people would come to me and say, well, I had an aunt who died of breast cancer. And I think they were just trying to find a way to connect with me. But that connection really felt really quite counterproductive, I guess, to say the least. And so for me, it was, I don't only want to connect with cancer patients. I want to connect with someone who really gets it, because then I feel like that conversation can be really productive. So just really quickly to orient you, we have 2 main platforms for how we are trying to get these voices out there and connect to people. The first is our website, and we are a pan-cancer organization. So we are both solid tumor and blood cancers. We don't cover everything yet. And some areas, there are many more voices than others, and we're trying to work on that. We also have, you see on the right-hand side here, medical providers. So the main offering, if you will, is patient voices. But as I mentioned earlier, the second part of this is empowering people, and that's education. So when we talk about things that are very medical, we don't ask patients and their caregivers. We talk to specialists in the field, like a Dr. Rhodes. And in fact, we feature Dr. Rhodes on our platform. And I'm happy to link to that wonderful conversation for you later on. But there's a through line there, which is humanize cancer. A lot of the medical information from experts that you can find online, it's for other healthcare providers, right? And so it is riddled with jargon, and it's so hard to understand. That was something that I dealt with, and I really wanted to understand a little bit more about what was a potential treatment for me later on, or information about side effects. And again, that jargon was really hard to get through. So our goal is we will talk to specialists, cancer specialists, but we're not only going to find people who are brilliant, we're going to find people who are really good at talking in layman's terms, like you're having a conversation. This is so important. So for any of you out there who are looking to do any of this kind of content, when you're looking for that person, that is almost half the battle, right? So happy to talk more about that if you have specific questions. Our video channel on YouTube has been one of the most explosive channels for us. The reason for us, we believe, is we are filling a void. And this, by the way, is just a screenshot of some of the most recent ones that we've done. So I didn't select anything. These are just some of the recent videos. But for us and for me, with my background in broadcast storytelling, I really do feel that second best to meeting someone in person is to be able to see them, like see their emotion, hear them. There are things about expression that can't be replaced by writing. And of course, there's also things that through writing are really powerful too. But for us, that video really conveys the emotion of what people are looking for in that connection. And so we just have really high engagement on our videos. People are watching. We are really trying to, zoom in on the human experience so people can understand that they are not alone. And I just cannot, say that enough, really addressing that you are not alone. So, and you'll see that our views range from like this one about colon cancer by Haley, who by the way is in Oakland. She started a nonprofit that's called Bright Spot Network to help people who are pregnant with cancer or have little kids and have cancer. And she, in just 3 weeks had almost 200,000 views. And I'm going to address this later. Take a look at this one that says many patients feel dismissed. This was actually coming out of one of the medical conferences. We met with Dr. Grant. We had Valerie, who's a myeloma patient, really talk about discrimination in cancer care and put voice, a human voice to what that means. And you'll see the views. We've tried. And so I'm going to get to that later. But I think that's where we need a lot more work and attention. That one says it's fewer than 750 views in 1 month. I had mentioned this in the CAB meeting earlier. I'm just really grateful. The numbers aren't everything, but in just the last 28 days alone, we had 1 million views on our videos. And a lot of these are really engaged views. And so really excited because all that means is we're growing our impact and we've really worked hard at that. I knew I was going to lose my voice a little. So I think the first place to start, it's the voice and leaning into it is a form of advocacy. And I think it's maybe one of the most accessible forms of advocacy. I'm in a space now where I work with a lot of different organizations. And I think something that I hear is people want to do more and they feel that their cancer experience is very powerful. But then the word advocacy is very intimidating and overwhelming. Well, I don't know if I have time and energy for that. I have a full-time job or I have a family and, who has time for this? But just sharing a story is advocacy. And I really believe that because we have seen firsthand the power and the impact of just having someone talk about what they went through. Just countless comments every day we get now from people who say, I was feeling really down, didn't really know how to continue on, but this is giving me that juice to keep going. And that's so powerful. So if you think about it, that story too that's being shared is beneficial to all parties. For the people who are watching, of course, they're looking for it. They really want to know real context. And I want to dive into that second sub-bullet because what they're providing too is hope from real people. That doesn't mean they sugarcoat. When we talk to people, we have these long conversations from first symptoms through diagnosis, through all of the scans and the bone marrow biopsies, which I experienced too. And then through all the mental and emotional hurdles of what did that actually mean and bring to you in your life? Then the impact to your family. How did you break the news? All of these things. And so they don't sugarcoat. But what I said earlier about the person you choose being more than half the battle, that's what it is. We select people who are authentically, bringing positive energy. So they don't sugarcoat their story, but their message to people is one of, you can do this, right? We're not going to host someone who is, going through really tough. Well, let me take that back. We have featured voices of people with maybe say like negative thoughts, if you will. But what they really focus on is, this is how I got through that, right? So we're not trying to sugarcoat or protect anyone from what the actual experience was. And also something that I hear a lot from people who are dabbling into storytelling and dabbling into patient voice. They say, well, we don't want to say too much, or we don't want to go too far because we don't want to give false hope. So for instance, if I do Stephanie's story and then, I made it through first line treatment, okay, is that providing false hope? Because what if that person relapses or is refractory to treatment? But the point is actually that, and again, I've spoken with hundreds of people about this. If we don't have hope, what do we have? Like, what is, then we might as well resign ourselves to, well, I don't know. I don't know if I should do this. I don't know if I should go through treatment. Maybe I should just not even consider it, right? So I think this is something that we're really trying to tackle. We are not trying to dangle like, carrots in front of people and say, well, this is going to be you. But preventing that voice, having a void there is actually going to lead to much worse outcomes. You're leaving a void for narrative writing. You're leaving a void. And just as a quick tangent, which I think is important, this is also the case in doctors' offices. Doctors have told us, well, we don't want to give false hope, so we won't say something. But I'll tell you, in the absence of sharing information, you leave a lot of room for narrative writing. And that narrative writing is typically not driven by something that is going to be productive. So our whole conversation with people is just talk about it, bring light to it, and then you can have a real authentic conversation about it. And having someone show what can happen gives people a really good sort of direction of, oh, they had this side effect, I'm feeling that too, and this is what they did about it. So it's not just about survival, it's about how to get through life day to day. For the person, and also learning to advocate. One of the biggest learnings that we have had in the last few years has been that, and I think for many of you, you work in the space, a lot of us know that speaking up is a great thing, but for the average patient and care partner, it is actually very unclear how much they can ask questions, even in the doctor's office, okay? It is so pervasive and it's a problem. I actually felt it too. My doctor was great, but I didn't want to be a problematic patient. So there were definite moments where I hesitated. Is this question a good question? Is it a dumb question? Is it going to annoy her? All of these things are actually a really shared experience. We've also learned, and this is not a surprise, that older generations have to deal with this more because there was a doctor knows best, paradigm that we are shifting away from, right? The younger generations are like at a place already where they know they can ask more, but it is still largely a problem. So when people see other people who say, either I knew to advocate for myself because my parents worked in insurance or my mom's a doctor or whatever, or from someone who says, I wish I had advocated for myself more and gotten a second opinion or just even ask questions, that is powerful because that is modeling for someone that not only is it possible, it's a good thing to do. And it's really interesting because we don't give ourselves permission to do things on our own, but once we see somebody else do it, it's like, okay, I guess that is possible. So that's been really powerful. For the people who are sharing their stories, it's cathartic. It's what I call pain to purpose. It gives people an opportunity to take something and feel like, well, I wasn't a victim to this. I'm actually, it's not something I'd wish on anybody else. This is how I feel. But I learned a lot. And now guess what? I used to storytell in news. I didn't love that part. I liked the human interest stories. But now I feel like I've got this cancer experience and I can take all of my career from before and bring that to an impactful area because I know that these stories and these voices are making a difference. And that's been really helpful for me too, personally. And we hear that time and time again for the people who are sharing their stories. So some of those common topics that we go into are diagnosis, living with cancer, changing relationships, treatment decision-making. The parentheses is, was it shared treatment decision-making or was it just one-sided? And survivorship, which can mean a whole lot of things. I like Brene Brown a lot. I just like her message about vulnerability. But this quote I really love, which is, owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy, the experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. And I just really believe in this quote because I really believe that the more that we shine a light on the hardest things that we all go through collectively, the better it is for everybody. So not just for us, not just for the immediate audience. And part of our larger mission is to get people to talk more about cancer. We just, don't want to scare people with the numbers, but we all know what those numbers are. At some point in our lives, we will be impacted by cancer, whether as a patient and or as a family member or close friend. And the less we know, because we're not willing to talk about cancer because it's such a dark word, the harder it is. So part of our greater mission at the Patient Story is to just have more conversation, to show people it's okay and also really good, to connect and share your story. And it's empowering to embrace that vulnerability. And so that's been some of the greatest moments, I would say, of some of the conversations I've had. So one of the things I wanted to cover too is in the programs that we all put together as organizations, I think a lot of us talk about, well, we want to educate people. We want to educate different populations about their risk, about screening, about upcoming treatments, about clinical trials, how there's no placebos in cancer clinical trials the way people think there are. All of these things, we want to humanize these things. And so we set up programs that are very much about the education. So I see a lot of programs out there that say, clinical trials for, X cancer, or what are biomarkers, in lung cancer, ALK positive, KRAS, like all these things. And that's fine and great for the people who are already knowledgeable about these topics, like they are already engaged. But the big question is, how do we activate the larger audience who have no idea what you're talking about? We cannot start there. We have to start where people are, mentally and emotionally and spiritually and everywhere else. And so what the Patient Stories strategy has been, let's connect with people first. Again, number one, we want to put stories out there that really dive into their human experience so that, number one, people know they're not alone. But then we have an opportunity because we're reaching more than 1 million people in the last, or more than 1 million views, not people, views in the last 28 days. We can drop educational seeds in there. So I have a story from 2 years ago with Shirese in Northern California, lifelong educator, Black woman of faith, love, was very energetic, then started feeling all these symptoms. And long story short, she was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. She had back problems. She went to the first doctor. Doctor said, yep, are you a smoker? She said, no, I don't have a smoking history. Okay, well, you're going to go through this chemo. You need to just go to it right now. She didn't feel good. And she had role models of advocacy. So she knew to speak up. She's like, something doesn't feel right. I feel like almost like a factory line of patients that are just kind of getting thrown in there. But I want to know that I'm getting the best treatment for me. No medical background. She went for a second opinion. They were like, oh, well, have you done biomarker testing? What's that? I have no idea. Turns out she was ALK positive. Completely changed the trajectory of her treatment. That was many years ago. Had she gone through that initial chemo that was outdated, who knows, right? Who knows? But so our story was about Shirese, the lifelong educator who has lots of passion, lots of faith, then experienced these symptoms and then found out about ALK positive and how that changed her trajectory. We didn't start with, this is what a biomarker is, and here are all the different kinds of biomarkers, right? And so for us, it's just a different kind of education, but it activates a much larger audience. So it depends on your organization and your mission and your priorities, but that's just something that I would consider. So, some of the most clinical sounding topics that are really popular right now are the two that I've mentioned, clinical trials and biomarkers. So these are two areas where I think patient stories, care partner stories, whatever you can do to humanize what that means, really powerful. And by the way, the pictures you're seeing are all people that we featured on our channels. Another quick quote, we can either see our circumstances as a set of random cruelties and then allow those hardships to turn us into bitter victims, or we can recognize the fact that though we may never comprehend why hard things happen, they do, and when they do, we can reach for a larger purpose beyond the pain. And I just wanted to put that up there because this is another shared feeling and thought that a lot of the patients I speak with have, and I think it is just so powerful. And it's another sort of way of pointing to how empowering it is for people to be able to turn their stories into something that is a tool for other people, knowing that it is going to be helping a lot of other people. All right, I'll try to get through these last couple of slides so we have enough time for Q&A. But one of our major focuses, and I've talked to Dr. Rhodes, we've done a conversation about it, I've talked to her offline about it, is what is health equity, right? And we hear about DEI all the time, and we have in the last few years. And that's really important. But what we've also seen is people's eyes glazing over because they hear that so much, but I don't think they understand what does that actually mean and how does that impact us? And so that's where the real work is, and we're trying to do that work, and it's going to take more time. But let's talk about it. So when we talk about underserved groups of people, for us, we're talking about two main ones for us. We've talked about communities of color, and we know the rates of the disproportionate rates of diagnosis and death for a lot of communities of color, right? Also, for people who live, the other part of it is, where do you live? It matters. And so I was in San Francisco when I was diagnosed. I had UCSF, I had Stanford. I mean, I had lots of options. But for people who live in rural areas and are, as we know, 80 to 85% of Americans are going to a community cancer clinic or healthcare system, hospital. So that just doesn't bode well for those who are dealing with a more rare cancer, which make up a good chunk of cancers, or those that are going through a lot of change in terms of treatment and that landscape, because those oncologists and hematologists, they may be incredibly brilliant, but they have to treat everybody. So how can they stay up to date about every single, we know that myeloma has a lot of changes, CLL, DLBCL, like there's so many changes happening. And so where you live can make a big difference in the medical treatment that you're getting, right? In a lot of different ways. I'm covering broad strokes right now. But the second point here is, how do we have a real conversation in this space? And I wanted to highlight listening, because we can share all we want, but we need to figure out a way of telling these stories where people will listen. That's really what it is. And so in order to do that, we as advocates, we know already, we're at the table. Everyone here is at the table already. So how do we get the other people to come to the table? And you'll see, I showed you that one, it was a screenshot of like the most recent stories we've done. You had examples of, 200,000 views, and then you had the one I showed you of 743 views. That one should not have 743 views. It's about a real patient experience and real research that's happening to better the care for Black patients specifically. In that one, we didn't expect to be much greater because it was also specific to myeloma, but we expected it to be higher. We were working on all these marketing things to try and make sure people got to see it. There's so much more that we can do better. And a lot of that has to do with collaboration, which is why I'm so glad that I'm talking to all of you. But we have noticed a trend, and this is just very real. For any content where we're trying to represent a diverse voice, the views are down. Clicks aren't happening. I think thumbnails, like people will see and maybe they don't feel like they can relate or whatever. And it's not that, communities of color aren't online. They are. What it's telling us is we need to do a better job of collaborating with organizations and making sure that we're getting it out to people in the right way. But that's the work that really has to happen, is how do we get people to listen? Because we also are trying to get a broader audience to listen. So if you look down there, it's like different cultures, different nuances. A lot of times I think we skip that first step of who's our audience for this particular project or this particular objective. For some of them, if it's about screening, then it is about maybe, Asian Americans or about, Black Americans or Latino Americans. But if it's something else about awareness, maybe there's a broader audience there and we want everybody to listen and take part, then the strategy has to be different. So the patient story, our team, it's a work in progress. So there's no huge aha moment yet for us, except that we really want to collaborate more so that we make sure that we're reaching the right audiences. And I think there's strength in numbers. And I think it's a good time to also say that we are so niche in what we do at the patient story. So we have our own growing audience, and we also have a full production capability. We can do patient recruitment and engagement all the way through post-production of high quality videos. So we've been partnering with organizations like the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society and Immerman Angels, because they are very focused on one thing, and we can bring our skills. And I think 1 + 1 = 3 in this case. So I think this is something that, many of us could talk about. How can we help in the storytelling efforts for some of you? This will be very quick, but, I just want to hit on the fact that a lot of the information that's out there, that's anything medical, is again just completely dressed in jargon, because it's not meant for patients and families, it's meant for other providers. And there's so much of that content, like, you go online, you look for anything, and it's doctors speaking to doctors. So we're trying to go to conferences and focus on some of the key developments, and then bring that to our audience of patients and their family members so that they can be in the know and they can ask their doctors about things if they're not getting asked by their doctors, right? So I think we're just trying to make sure that the education is out there and it's layman's terms and it's easy to digest, and it also piques people's interest. Our goal being that we'll get to a better place of shared treatment decision making. Quick thing is just that we've done well in talking to different, doctors, and I'm going to go through this, but this is what I call kind of going to church feeling. It's like we get the comments every day, and it is so powerful just to hear what people have to say about the impact of a simple story. Like, I can't get that across enough. It is really interesting because when I first started the patient story, more as a passion project, because I didn't know, I knew I wanted it, I didn't know if other people did. I kept thinking, everyone's treating patient stories like a side dish. I think it's the entree. And I think that what we're proving is that there really is true impact here that can really move a needle. And it's not just a story. It's got so many ways of, it's empowering, it's educational, it's a connecting device, it's a lot of different things. And so for you, there's my contact information. I'd love to hear from you. And we're very grateful. We're very busy and overwhelmed trying to grow the team because there's just so many projects that are happening. But right here, I'd love to work with people in the Bay Area or wherever you are and figure out, how can we be working together to help patients and their family members and care partners at home in a much better way. So I'll stop there. I hope that's okay. I don't know, Dr. Rhodes, if you want to give me some direction. I'll stop my screen share for now.
Yeah,
and join the group again.
Thank you so much. That was great. And I don't know, for those of you who've not heard of the patient story, if that kind of blew you away a little bit, but 1 million views on some of these videos, I think is a really important way to be reaching folks. And I appreciate also your attention to the fact that when you're talking about equity or communities of color, that the views are down. So I think that's a problem, a challenge that there may be some advice and guidance here in this space to try to address that, because the truth is, if we achieve best outcomes for communities who have traditionally not achieved that, everybody else is going to get better outcomes, because really, I think people get uncomfortable if you're doing something for one group and not doing it for everybody. So I think if we can have an impact there, that has an overall benefit. So there are a few questions in the chat. I'm going to just call out names because I see who has written them, and this is just in the order that they were entered in, and then we'll kind of catch up with where the chat is now. But Rox, I think you were asking if videos that have already been produced in the Pacific Islander community could be reused, or am I capturing that? Can you say more?
Yeah. Hi, Stephanie. So over 10 years ago, and I was just looking because I'm no longer with that agency, but when YouTube was still kind of new, we took it and the quality of the video is probably not up to what the patient story has, but we did have 10 years of funding, and we were able to go into different Asian Pacific Islander communities, also in the Pacific, to also just try to capture stories of various cancer survivors too. And they're all dated, but they are very diverse. And also when I look at the view counts, I mean, I know that was like 10, 12 years ago. So I just wondered, in an effort to help show diversity and experiences, is there an opportunity to link to, and I'm sure my group is not the only one that has stories like this, but how could there be potential partnering to connect and house it in a new space too, for example?
So thank you for that. And so to clarify, you're saying, asking if we could house other content on our platform? Is that
it might be just because it's already on YouTube. They're already on links. And because I had to do this for someone, they asked me, give me video links of any diverse Asian Pacific Islander cancer survivor videos. And I go, I have like 25, 30, so how could, they be potentially repurposed to show, again, the diversity of faces and experiences?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think we have largely done collaborations where it's new content. So maybe it's somebody you've already talked to. but we do it in the patient story way. We do link, by the way, to other organizations on our website, right? So if there are resources, feel free to email me and I can get our team to put them up on our website to be able to show that there are other resources out there. So we can certainly do that. But in terms of new video content, even if you're already on YouTube, and especially because we have a particular brand, it's a little bit hard to then, I don't even know how we could link from our YouTube to a different channel. They don't set it up for that, So, but always open to collaboration. So if it's, hey, this person's a really powerful story, we think that you should feature, this person, we would love to have a conversation.
Great. And I know that probably others in this circle have maybe videos like that and have identified folks. Maybe you could just speak to, if we wanted to bring someone in to create a story in the format that you've already laid out, what would that process look like? Because I think there are probably quite a few people on here who may have people in mind who would be great inspirational kind of storytellers.
Yeah, so we have an intro, we have an intro survey, like a get to know you form, and I'll put that link in the chat for people who either want to share their own story or want to nominate someone, and that just gets it into our system. So let me actually do that right now so that I don't forget, but that helps us to really orient and keep track of, who's who and make sure that we're getting to people. It's been a wild ride because we are just inundated with requests. And so, we will kind of do it in terms of, okay, our priority area right now is, XYZ. And so we have to do that. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to move through everything. But if there's a, referral from someone in this group, that would probably fast track it in terms of a priority.
Great. As you know, we have made a couple of videos for our cancer campaigns, and I'm thinking of one speaker in particular that people really moved by what she had to say, and I'm actually feeling sorry that she's not in this space right now, but luckily this is recorded, so it can be shared in the future. There was a question about addressing how you reach the Latino community, which I think kind of dovetails with, and maybe say more about, there's some questions about navigation and programs for African-American men. One came from Gary Blodger, the other one came from Irene. And if you guys want to unmute and just say more, if you have more to add to that. And just to be clear, this is not really a navigation program, but there are lots of navigation programs in this who are sitting on this meeting right now, Gary. So I don't know if you want to address that.
Ladies first.
Is Irene still on? Yeah. I think her question was, how do you engage the Latino community, and do you have materials in Spanish and translated videos?
Oh, okay. You summarized it really well. Hi, Irene.
I have no voice. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. Me neither. So we have talked about it. I will say that one of the initial projects that when it was really just me wearing all the hats and I didn't even have a team, I worked with a friend who speaks Spanish natively. And I was like, well, all the content that we're doing, I want to reach the Spanish speaking audience because I don't know that they're getting the content that they need. And so we did all this stuff, and it was all this real translation work. And then we put it out there and we realized, oh wait, what about the marketing? Like, how do we get it to people? And so there was a huge learning obviously there about, we really need to have the resources to be very intentional about every project that we do. And so the short answer honestly is we are looking to be able to partner with organizations probably more at the end of this year, because we're still trying to get our project going for reaching more of the Black community for very specific kind of cancers. And we're just trying to be very intentional, and we can't spread ourselves too thin. And so what our internal conversations have been, it is clear that we know that everyone gets their information differently, gets stories, gets content differently. And it could be online, offline, radio, TV. I mean, it's just like so many different things. So In terms of what we are trying to do with the diversity and reaching people, we are trying to put on more in-person events. And this is actually where I talked to Dr. Rhodes earlier, and I think we could continue to have more conversation, but to have real events that are less educational and sterile feeling and more like true community events where we can gather the right people. Again, it's about curating the right voices, and then have the event and then be able to share because we have these production and post-production abilities, we can capture this and then bring it to a much broader audience, right? Mm-hmm. So we're trying to put together something like a program that will have a lot of legs, have either an online or live program that is going to have components of like community, if it's live and in person, music, food, whatever, to really bring people together. Have people who come in not to say like, I'm going to teach you this, right? But to really just be like neighbors and community members among community members and just talk about some of these topics. And so we're planning all those things. It takes a little bit more time. Really open to learning from you out there. I know there are a lot of you who work directly with communities and know a lot more than we do. And we would be really happy to partner, right? And say, we can really help with some of the strategizing for putting together content and how to get it to a broader audience. But with your expertise, how can we reach, the Latino community or Spanish speakers or Black men, in this particular space? So it's a work in progress.
And similarly, I think your answer probably applies to Jill's question from Mendocino about American Indian community. Haven't really focused there yet.
No, I think the first, lowest hanging fruit, if you will, is that we've been trying to represent more voices in the patient stories, right? So that's a much easier way of at least reaching some of the people and increasing that representation. But when we talk about really meaningful numbers and really understanding that we're bringing the impact, we don't want to just kind of go in and go out, oh, we're going to do this for like a month. And then we really want to have a long-term plan here. And so that's the ongoing conversation. So I think we're parallel processing some of these things. Yes, we're trying to get more diverse representation in the stories themselves. Just got to do that. We have to do that. That's really important. And then alongside that, what is that longer term planning and strategy for how to really reach communities and in a meaningful way? Because we know that people are paying attention. Like, is it a helicopter thing? Like you're dipping in, dipping out for something? Or are you really like sticking around to measure the impact? And so with what we're doing with our stories, what we've grown now is also how do we really measure the impact? Like that's a whole nother component that we're trying to invest in. So yeah, total work in progress. Please reach out to me if you have ideas. Would love to talk about collaboration.
Well, so given that you do have an emphasis on increasing focus in the African American community, I do want to make sure that we connect you with and looking for other platforms or other ways to get the stories across, like an in-person meeting that gets recorded and then edited and produced. And I just want to point out that the Men's Health Committee of our CAB will be doing their annual event and have been supporting a support group for Black men with prostate cancer. I think this is year 7. So that might be another opportunity for people to be talking about their stories in ways that don't look the way you currently have them posted, but maybe more appealing or could be pushed out in that way.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to bring that up. And that said, one more question from Gary is, how do you get this in front of administrators in the healthcare systems? I guess to inform them about, Gary, you can unmute, but to inform them about the communication issues. I don't know if that's what you were getting at.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Rose. And communication issues, as well as programs, services that are specifically designed to impact the inequities and disparities in healthcare for Black patients in general and overall. When we speak specifically of Black men, how do we improve the communication with regards to all of these programs that are available, and then also the services that are rendered in terms of bringing equity to the table. I first also have to, give the highest regards to Baba Gerald and Michael Shaw on, there's a list of people that I can name here, but these conversations are definitely ongoing. And when we talk about everyone starting from the same, starting line, how can we bring that to bear without our Black patients always winding at the lower realm of the echelon regarding care? And how do we sustain that in terms of changing programs or services?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can approach this, our tactic has been, excuse me, shining a light on these issues is like one of the most important first steps in getting the awareness out there. I mean, in terms of breaking down the question, and forgive me, you can, tell me if I'm totally off base here, but in terms of bringing hospital administrators to the table, just in general, right? We are trying to work more with hospitals and healthcare systems, and the way that we do that is through doctors who are very passionate. Actually, that's kind of been our first step. Is we don't just have like a straight line to the administrators, but we know the doctors who are interfacing with patients every day and really care about their lives and their quality of life. They will be the ones to be kind of the bigger voice for us. We don't address specifically like how can we get policy, like we're not in policy, for instance. But I think the very first step is to a lot of people aren't even aware. And the more that they see that people care about something, so like if there's a story that gets out there and it gets a lot of exposure, that's a huge first step. That's a huge catalyst oftentimes, right? It's very similar to how news used to work still maybe, but how people would want a news story because it would call attention to something and you can't bury it anymore. Like if the more you get it out there and get people talking about things, the more you can shine a light on it. So we are trying to address that in that way. But we don't work in policy. So we don't work with like actual administrations on the ins and outs of how to change things.
I appreciate that. However, when you look at it from the analysis of groundwater lake fishes, right? So if our patients are the fish and the care systems are the lakes, the pollutants are coming in from the groundwater, and that's the administration, right? So if we can't propose, equitable changes from the top down, right? Because they're the ones who fund the programs. They're the ones who implement, changes the strategies of, care. And the doctors can only implement those changes, in practice. So we definitely need to look at it from a perspective of imposing change from administrative perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that, Gary.
Historical.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. I just have one quick response. Is just, I think that the power of the voice and humanizing what that means, because a lot of times when people talk about issues, unless you're directly impacted, people don't listen. So the best thing that we can do to bring awareness to it is to humanize. So if it were, Gary's story about this is what happened to me or to my family member, that's the power. Right? Because then people care. They associate with that as an experience. They associate with you as a person. They associate with those emotions. That gets people to care. And so there are powerful ways of bringing light to the issues that you're talking about that can lead to change. And it really does start though with people kind of volunteering their voices to say, this was my experience and I'm not willing to stay quiet about it. And here's what I think needs to happen.
I concur. We're currently in the process with Alameda Health Systems of bringing racial disparities to the forefront. We're talking to the trustees, to the administrators, in terms of how we can bring about sustainable program changes into. So again, having all stakeholders at the table, the process by which you're speaking is definitely credible. And we actually advocate for that, patient experience as well. But again, to bring all stakeholders to the table is also a necessary entity of change. I appreciate you. Thank you for your presentation.
So I want to suggest, Gary, I've heard the y'all's groundwater metaphor in Alameda County, and I want to say that the groundwater is contaminated actually by the society that we live in, right? It's getting contaminated in terms of how people see patients and see them separately from themselves as providers or healthcare professionals. That is what walks through the door when people come to medical school, when people come to work at the hospital. They're just bringing what they had out, on the outside. I think it's just getting translated across all of these different spaces. There is one more question that I wanted to bring in here that's relevant to where we are right now, but I want to remind everybody the evaluation link is in the chat. Please evaluate, please evaluate what we're doing. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what you want to hear next and want to be responsive to that. So we can't if you don't fill it out. So there's the link again. Thank you, Eva. The last question that I had captured from the chat was from Michelle Mosley, who leads our education work, our community health education work, about infusing kind of the cultural feel or way of storytelling. How do you, since you have a format, how do you, pivot or flex so that really can come through and help people connect to the content?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, just to address, we don't do a news story format. We do, look at we have different buckets of content that we're growing into, but our main core, video is that patient story. We never approach it like a news story. It is always, what is the emotion of the story? And I think that's the first layer of the connection that we're trying to establish, because people are searching because they're in a particular mental space and emotional space, and we're trying to address that first. So that's how we've approached it. When it comes to culture, it is really interesting, because unless we are talking about maybe an underrepresented group where there was a very striking difference in the way they felt that they got their care or that they didn't have access to something, sort of that level of lived experience isn't really the first place that these stories go to, because it is so specific to a cancer experience. And so people are really diving more into, like, our whole thought process. We just want to get into beyond the ABCs of a cancer diagnosis. Like, what does that mean? So those are really the questions we ask as we navigate this story, right? So it's really emotionally driven, less so about, some people will talk about a bone marrow biopsy, but it's more about, this is how I went to the office expecting, I got a diagnosis that day, and then they were like, let's just go ahead and do the bone marrow biopsy. I'm just going to drill this thing. And then how isolated, how nervous I felt scared. So, we're just trying to dive into that piece of it as like the thread throughout the story. And the cultural part of it hasn't, in terms of like someone's, ethnic culture, for instance, or something, that hasn't been as much part of these stories. Now, is that someplace that we could go to? Absolutely. I think that we are our small team still growing. And so we've really tried to address, the stories that we feel could have a bigger reach first, so that we can get that going. And we have every intention of making sure that we address all these different nuances of people's lived experiences. So it'll take us a little bit of time to get there, but we're working on it.
Great. Well, and we're so grateful to have you as part of our joint advisory committee, providing advice and guidance to our Office of Community Engagement. And also, we kind of put you there intentionally because we know that a lot of people are kind of going to want to interface with what you're doing from different levels and from different perspectives. And so just want you all to know that Stephanie is committed to working with us very closely. So part of what's in the evaluation link is asking if you want to connect further. Those connections we will facilitate through our office. So if you click it that you want to connect with Stephanie, please provide an email address or the best way that we can reach you to make that connection happen. Do we have any last questions or comments or thoughts or things that we didn't cover?
Dr. Rose, this is Lisa. I just really wanted to go back for a second to those cultural nuances. I mean, after the 3 years of the pandemic and the continuation of the pandemic, those cultural nuances are very critical in terms of how people absorb information, how they interpret it, how they act on it, how their family is impacted. So if that is the next area that you're planning to go in, Stephanie, I think that is important. And I think a number of us would be interested in helping to support that effort.
I love that. Thank you. So I'll take you up on that for sure, Lisa. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining us for the CAB2. Remember, the 2 is for invite 2 people. So the next time we come together, I hope that you will bring 2 people with you. And if you don't or you can't, just remember we do record these sessions. And so we will send out a link with the recording. So then you can share the recording with other people and make sure that they're aware that this is open to the community. We are a public institution. Your taxpayer dollars pay for our research, pay for our salaries, etc. So all of this information that we bring to you is yours. You paid for it already. So we want to make sure that as many people get access to it as possible. We thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much to our speaker, to Stephanie, and I'm guessing that 1 million of those views are some of our staff who have apparently been binge watching your channel.
Oh, nice. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks everybody for being here.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you in, we'll be back in, gosh, what is it? July, I guess. Am I getting that right? We'll be back in July. So we'll see you then. Please let us know what you want us to feature. We will work our hardest to be responsive to your requests.